Welcome back to Green Mountain Mornings on WKVT, 100.3 FM and AM 1490. It is 8:16 on your Friday morning and 48 degrees outside. I'm your host, Olga Peters. And in this hour, I will be speaking with Randy Holhut from the Commons. We will be talking about a number of municipal projects going on in Brattleboro, and Randy will be speaking about a meeting on rural policing, so stay tuned for that. Welcome back to Green Mountain Mornings on WKVT 100.3 FM and AM 1490. It is 8:22 in the morning and still 48 degrees outside. I'm your host, Olga Peters, and I have on the phone with me Deputy Editor of the Commons, Randy Holhut. Welcome, Randy.
Good morning, Olga. I'm very glad to say that. Good morning, everyone. And hi, Joyce.
Hi, Joyce. So Randy, I'm looking at the Commons. Great front page this week. Wendy's done a lot of good reporting. But one thing that caught my eye was your article on rural policing. How much and who pays? Senate committee takes up that question at a public hearing around the state, or at public hearings around the state before legislative session. Tell me more about that.
Well, Jeanette's decided that instead of doing yet another, Jeanette White, our senator, our senior senator from Windham County,
yes,
decided instead of doing yet another report that's going to get jammed on the shelf with all the other reports that are making the bookshelves in their committee room sag from the weight of all those words, that they'd actually go out before the session and do a series of hearings around the state to take testimony from police departments, from town officials, from citizens, and get a feeling for what constitutes an adequate level of public safety, and police presence. As you know from your coverage of towns around Windham County, there are only 4 towns that have full-time police departments: Dover, Wilmington, Brattleboro, and Bellows Falls. Mm-hmm. We're not too sure about Bellows Falls going forward either.
I know, given the conversations around their fire department.
Yes. So the rest of the towns in the county have, cobbled together a combination of contractual coverage with the Windham County Sheriff's Department, and that ranges from say 20 or 25. 20 hours a day of coverage in Vernon to 20 hours a week of coverage in places like Putney. Mm-hmm. And actually, they get about 40 hours a week. But anyways, to almost no coverage, like in Whitingham, and particularly in Whitingham, where you're too far away from the Shaftesbury Barracks, and you're too far away from the Westminster Barracks, and you're too far away from the Shelburne Falls Barracks, Massachusetts. The dirtbags that like breaking into houses know, hey, this is an area we can just break into houses and nobody's going to bother us.
Right, or if you're like me and you're going home on a snowy night when you still lived in Whitingham and you got a little, shall we say, fender bender?
Yeah, and you're stuck in a snowbank, and you maybe
stuck in a snowbank for like an hour.
A long time. You gotta, but in the case of Whitingham, they've asked about having Wilmington do some police coverage. They can't do it. The Sheriff's Department can't do it either, because you're also, besides the cost of paying for outside help, like contracting with the Sheriff's Department, or even if it was possible, contracting with a neighboring town that has a police department, there's still the question of personnel. And all the police departments are shorthanded and having difficulty recruiting new officers.
Oh, interesting. And is that in part to do with pay?
Well, pay, but also just meeting the qualifications. It's the Springfield police chief was there, and he was saying about, that he's lucky that if 30 people apply for a job, he gets one, maybe two, that are qualified to go on to the academy.
Oh, wow. Because
they may not meet the physical requirements, they may not meet pass the tests, has. You can add to the list of things that millennials are ruining, that ever-lengthening list of the millennial generation.
Oh, no.
Is policing. Because they don't take direction well, from what the chief was saying.
I can see how in a police officer you might want that.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll give him that one.
So all these things are colliding together in the issue of trying to put police protection together. I mean, and there are concerns also that towns are going to be forced to do it. And Jeanette's committee is still saying, no, we know that's probably not going to happen because that would require something that Chip Stearns, the acting municipal manager in Putney, brought up, which is maybe it's time to start thinking about a statewide consolidation of police.
Oh, okay.
And having it under one umbrella where everyone pays, where it's not just the towns that can afford to pay have police service.
So like Act 60 for the police department?
Yeah, like an Act 46 for police departments, yeah. And
I can see the public hearings now.
But that's on the table, and everything's being looked at right now because there definitely is a need for it, and the resources aren't there for many communities to pay for it.
So, what's the next step for this process then?
Well, the next step is after they've gathered all the information from the hearings they've had. They've about a dozen hearings around the state. The next step will be figuring out what kind of legislation and how much more testimony is needed before coming up with an idea of what constitutes an adequate level of policing and how's it going to get paid for. And
I can imagine part of what's difficult about figuring out what constitutes adequate policing is you've got what law enforcement might think is adequate policing, but then on the citizen side, and I can say this as a citizen myself, there are the things we worry about and the things we're afraid of. And those aren't always the same thing from town to town.
Well, adequacy is more defined as how many hours of policing are available to a town. And, what do you put a premium on for an officer's time? A barking dog or an assault in somebody's home.
Right. And how do you communicate those priorities to the public as well? Well, this is going to be interesting to watch going forward. It could mean some changes it sounds like some really big changes.
Yes, potentially big changes could be coming.
Well, stay tuned to that. I look forward to hearing more on this issue, Randy. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone, to Green Mountain Mornings on WKVT 100.3 FM and AM 1490. It is 8:38 in the morning and 49 degrees outside, and I have on the phone with me Randy Holhut from the Commons. And normally we talk about headlines from the Commons, but during the break, Randy and I got chatting, and it turns out, because we are chatters, it turns out that we've both read the same article in the Boston Globe about Canadian colleges are seeing an uptick in U.S. students, and it's a combination of, or they're attributing it to, lower tuition at Canadian colleges and millennials and current students just being fed up with the Trump administration and wanting out. So I found that really fascinating, Randy.
Well, when you think that you could go to a top-ranked college in Canada like McGill in Montreal for $8,000 a year.
Yes. Or actually,
and that
I think it's
compares
15
to
for
going
McGill,
to Northeastern, and that's $70,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
Do the math.
Well,
plus national health.
Mm-hmm.
You get your national health card. Plus, if you're being an international student, you can stay on for an extra 3 years after graduation.
Well, and that's the thing in this article that really caught my attention too was the Canadian government is actually looking at these young students as potential new Canadians.
Yes,
and they're what a different approach to, here we are in the U.S. going anyone who's not an American and here's Canada next door saying come on over.
Well, we know there's not a lot of people in Canada, and there's lots of room.
This is true.
And the approach that Canada's had ever since the end of World War II, where our doors are open, come on in, we need you, has been a big reason why there's a lot of international students are saying, I don't want to go to school in the United States. Canada sounds pretty good right now. Mm-hmm. And for those three things, the low tuition compared to a U.S. college, the national health card, and being able to stay there, and, of course, for the international students, not getting killed.
There's that. Well, actually, I'm an example of this to some extent. When I decided to go back and get my master's degree, I was looking at colleges in the U.S. and I was going for an MA or an MFA. I ended up getting my MA at the University of Westminster in London because even with the exchange rate, the high exchange rate, and living expenses for a year and tuition, I still took out a loan that was smaller than 1 year at a U.S. college.
And that leads to the reason why there's such a cost difference between the Canadian colleges and the colleges in the United States, and that is the government puts a premium on higher education and subsidizes it, where the United States has stopped subsidizing higher education to the extent that it used to be subsidized when it was a national security issue back during the Cold War, when they were handing out scholarships to get more math teachers and science teachers, and now they don't seem to be interested in math and science anymore.
Interesting. I didn't remember that part of history.
Yes, I mean, there was a time when education was seen as a national security issue, and that the Russians were ahead of us on this area. I mean, they put a satellite up in space before we did. We got to get on the stick, and we need more math and science education. And the whole generation of science teachers were subsidized by the federal government to get their degrees. Well,
and I think there are other signs of the times as well. I was speaking to a doctor recently who she has since retired. So you figure she's in her, mid 60s, early 70s. But when she went to medical school, tuition, she said, for her first year of medical school was under $3,000.
Yeah, and when I went to Holyoke Community College as a freshman in 1979, my tuition was $175 a semester.
Wow.
And the fees were an extra $50. And I thought that was a lot of money for coming from my background back in 1979. Now it's the tuition's $2,000.
Right.
And the fees are another $1,000.
Right. And then there's books and everything on top of that.
And community college is kind of the stepping stone on the college rung, and it's become unaffordable for a lot of people. I mean, look at how much CCV costs, and I know they tout themselves as being a cheaper alternative to going to Castleton or going to UVM, but it's still a lot of money, and that's because Vermont is near the bottom of the country in subsidizing public education. And when I was going to school back I was at the tail end of the era where it was a public policy priority to fund public education. That's when all those campuses sprung up, community college campuses sprung up around Massachusetts, and the big building boom at UMass and Amherst, and it was seen as an economic driver for states that were farsighted enough to invest in public education.
Right.
Now, that's gone.
Yes, and just to bring this full circle before we head back to issues with the Commons, recently I was talking to folks at the Wyndham Regional Career Center and BUHS, the directors at both those schools, and talking about our approach in at least this community towards, traditional high school education versus technical or vocational training, and how much kind of preconceived notions or even stigma we have around or towards technical training. And it seems like it's getting more dicey for students to mark their trail beyond high school. Except,
now, since college has kind of shifted from the gaining of knowledge for knowledge's sake to what's going to get me a job. And, a lot of traditional liberal arts paths are are closing up because of declining enrollments for kids who see that, being a literature major means I'm not going to get a job or I'm going to be slinging coffee somewhere.
Hey, I was an English major.
Yes.
And a literature writing major.
But the hybrid approach that we're seeing in Brattleboro, where you're seeing the Career Center and BUHS team up with, say, CCV, where you can do a triple play of getting a college track education with technical training that can be used for college credit to get a head start on a degree. And certainly just traditional voc training. I mean, look how much money that a carpenter or a plumber or an electrician makes.
Yeah. It's the trades can really be a great path forward for a lot of people.
There's still a need for machinists. We think, there's no more manufacturing. It's all tech.
Not true.
Manufacturing is tech.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And you need technical skills to be a machinist. And the companies that still are producing things like GS Precision are crying for qualified machinists.
It will be interesting to see. I know that the Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation, their staff member Alec Beck, is working with a number of local schools and kind of liaising between, if that's a word.
It is, but not a great word.
Not a great word. Not a pretty word. We shall try not to use it again. Between local education facilities and employers to try to start understanding what employers need and then crafting education that can help meet those needs.
Plus that list that came out a few months ago, just seems like years, that the McClure Foundation up in Burlington helped fund with the state. The list of occupations that don't require a 4-year college degree that pay at least $50,000 a year.
That was interesting.
And that are shown that there's going to be a need for people to fill positions in these fields. And it was a sizable list. And
with some
I don't know the place
entries.
where you can find it, but if you could look, it's worth tracking down if you're a young person who happens to be listening to this program, and if you are, my hat's off to you. To find out that a 4-year degree is not necessarily what you need if you're looking to try for a rewarding career doing something, and this includes tech jobs too.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Randy. So we're just about out of time, but I wanted to quickly, before we leave, and I'm glad we both read that Boston Globe article. That was fun. That's a lot to think about. But let's touch briefly on Wendy Levy's article about studying the water system in Brattleboro.
Yes, this was kind of an example of how the Commons does things, as you well know, where you take something that's kind of little and insignificant. So the town gets a grant to study the water system, to try and map it and find out ways to make it more efficient and usable, and turning it into well, how the heck does it work anyways? Yeah. Where does the water come from? And Steve Barrett, the Public Works Director, is nothing but helpful to us as reporters, because like any good department head, they recognize good press makes a difference at town meeting time. So
this is true.
Wendy got the complete tour from the Pleasant Valley Reservoir right down to the water treatment plant.
Oh, fantastic.
So that's why you got the picture on the front page of the handsome-looking Barrett standing next to the reservoir he's helping to take care of.
And we should note that Brattleboro's water system is more than 100 years old. It started out as a privately funded system before it was even a municipal system.
It's like a lot of things, no one knew the idea that, hey, water is a public good, and perhaps an entity larger than, somebody who owns the water company ought to be controlling it. Of course, that another idea like public education has gone by the wayside, or increasingly going by the wayside as our capitalist friends try to make everything a commodity for sale.
Yes.
But as much as people like to complain about Brattleboro water, the good news is there's an adequate supply of it. It's being well taken care of, and the people running the water system in Brattleboro really know what they're doing.
Wonderful. So yeah, if you haven't picked up your copy of this week's Commons, I encourage listeners to do that and check out Wendy's story, Studying the System. An award of $20,000 will fund a thorough study of municipal drinking water in Brattleboro. So thank you so much, Randy, for joining me today.
Thank you for the first getting on your first week of on the air as your first media guest. I appreciate that, and don't forget, the Commons is a free newspaper, but it's not really free.
It is.
We need your help to help make it a better newspaper. So go to donate.commonsnews.org and learn how you can become a member of Vermont Independent Media and help keep this paper rolling.
Thank you so much, Randy. I will talk to you soon. And yes, folks, journalism is extremely human resource intensive. There's a lot of humans putting together a lot of information.
And it's pretty darn important, too.
Yes. So thank you so much, Randy.
Okay, we'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.